emphasis on introducing romance novels to newbie romance readers. And before you start wondering if you accidentally stumbled into the wrong interview, let me assure you that along with romance, I am somewhat of a diehard mystery reader who cut my teeth on Hannah Swensen books and endless hours of Murder, She Wrote. So now that you know a little bit about me, please join me in welcoming today's interviewee, cozy mystery author Mia P. Manansala.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's so funny that you mentioned Hannah Swensen were the first cozy mysteries I read because my mom introduced them to me, as well as Murder, She Wrote, because I grew up with my grandparents as well. So, look at that.
Oh my gosh. It sounds like, honestly, we've kind of lived a very similar childhood because my mom is responsible for like all of my reading habits as far as I'm concerned. And I grew up on Murder, She Wrote and Magnum PI, Matlock, basically anything that when my grandma was babysitting me, that's what we watched.
Yeah, I was that 5-year-old watching like Matlock and Perry Mason. So
And you know what? Was I excited as a grown adult to see them now streaming on Hulu? Absolutely. So for anybody not yet familiar with Mia's work, though, of course, we aim to change that by the end of this conversation, please allow me to share that Mia is a writer and book coach from Chicago who loves books, baking, and badass women. Honestly, 3 of my favorite things. Mia is also known for using humor and murder to explore aspects of the Filipino diaspora, queerness, and her millennial love for pop culture. She is the recipient of multiple awards, including the 2021 Agatha Award for Best First Novel, the 2018 Hugh Holton Award, and the 2018 Eleanor Taylor Bland Crime Fiction Writers of Color Award. Her latest release, Homicide and Hollow Hollow, is the second book in her Tito Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series and a follow-up to her massively successful debut, Arsenic and Adobo. The third book in the series, Blackmail and Babinka, is expected this fall. Mia, anything to add to this glowing list of accomplishments? I know I'm barely scraping the surface here.
No, it's weird. Like, how do I add to that? Well, just basically, so yes, the third book comes out this October 4th, I believe, is the release date. And I originally had a 3-book contract with Berkeley, my publisher, but thanks to all my readers and the success of Arsenic and Adobo, they've extended my contract. So now there will be at least 6 books in the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series. So book 4 is titled Murder and Mamon. I'm working on it right now, and it comes out next summer.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, you know that I was going to ask how many more books we can expect. So I feel like you started us off on a great note. So that's something to look forward to for anybody that's already, plowed through the first 2 books. There's a lot more to come. And, obviously, if it isn't already clear enough, Mia and I are here to discuss our love for cozy mysteries as a genre. And Mia, I'd love to know, it sounds like Hannah Swensen and Murder, She Wrote might have been up on that list, but what was your introduction to the cozy mystery genre, and what made you fall in love with cozy mysteries?
Sure. So I've always loved like traditional mystery in general. Again, like you mentioned that your mom had a huge impact on your reading, and mine did as well. Like I discovered like Encyclopedia Brown on my own, but my mom introduced me like to Nancy Drew, and Mary Higgins Clark was a big part of like my reading growing up. Like, so in my household, there was never like, oh, these, you read kids books, but these are adult books. And like, if it was in the house, it was fair game. And my mom used to work at Walden Books back when those existed. And so, like employees could check out books as if it was like a library. So she, would bring home like the latest Mary Higgins Clark, read it, and then pass it on to me and be like, oh, this one was really good. Here, we can talk about it later. And even after, Walden Books folded, my mom was able to find a job at a library. She's a paid, one of those people whose job it is to put the books on the shelves, so she was just shelving in the fiction floor one day. And she was just like, Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder, what's that about? Which is the first book in the, the Joanne Fluke, Hannah Swensen mysteries. And so we've always loved mystery. And we really, really, as a family, love food. So, when she saw that, she was just like, oh, wow, there are mysteries that kind of combine this love that we have. And she told me about it. And so we just kind of started like buddy reading it, like my mom and I don't necessarily have a ton in common, but books are kind of what bring us together. So I started reading them to have something to talk about with her. And because of that, I found out about the world of cozy mysteries and culinary cozies in particular. And that's where it all started.
I think it's interesting, and I'll definitely want to talk more about this later as we get into your books, but I think it's interesting that just as books have like the power to give us something common to discuss and bring people together, I think food does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
oh yeah,
wonder
definitely.
that the two go together hand in hand, right? But
yeah, that's one of the things. There's some.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's one of the, that's one of the great things that by hearing from readers from, there's some people who have never tried Filipino food in their life, but like reading it, like the descriptions of like the dinners with the families, and they're like, oh, this sounds like my family, or oh, this reminds me of this person, or like, oh, I can't wait to try this because you reminded me of X. And I was like, oh, even though like the food itself or the certain aspects of the culture are very foreign to them, the heart of it and what food can be speaks to them, and that's something I really love about writing these books.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure it's clear that that's something that people love reading about them as well. So, I mean, to transition from a reader of cozies and specifically somebody who loved culinary cozies, what eventually inspired you to decide to write your own?
So I've always loved writing. And for the longest, I had no idea of being a mystery writer, even though it was one of my favorite genres to read. I originally thought I would probably do most likely middle grade fantasy, because those are like the books that kind of really captured my attention when I was a child. Building worlds was so fun to me. But then like one day I took a writing workshop. My very first creative writing class happened to be a mystery writing workshop, because I was like, oh, well, I've never taken a class. They tend to be expensive, but I love reading mysteries. Let me see what this class is about,
Mm-hmm.
That's like how I started writing, just like period. But like why cozy in particular, it's as much as I love the genre, it doesn't really reflect my world. I don't really see characters like me in these books. Because again, like I was reading the books that my mom was reading. So like, I read that, the Laura Child's like tea shop, things, Barbara Ross's like main clam. So like I read like there's some really, really great books out there, but it didn't reflect my world. A lot of times like the characters were near my age, but didn't sound like anybody I knew. There was not as much diversity as I saw in my world. And I knew I wanted to put my own spin. I wanted to see myself on the page.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the inspiration, at least. I've interviewed a number of authors who across genres have said something similar, where they decide to write because they want to write the story that they want to see. They want to see themselves and their family and their friends reflected in books. And if they're not seeing it, why not be the person to then write it? Because God knows if you're wanting to see it, somebody else is too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Well, I've said it before on the podcast, but I'm always impressed by anybody who takes the initiative to write a book, period, let alone finish one. But I have to say, releasing a debut novel during a global pandemic sort of takes that appreciation to a whole other level. And as I mentioned, your debut, Arsenic and Adobo, debuted in May 2021. So I'd love to know a little bit about the process of releasing a book, let alone your debut book during the pandemic, and sort of how that first release has differed, if any way, from the release of Homicide and Hollow Hollow.
Yeah, it's not exactly like the dream to be, releasing during a pandemic. There were a lot of difficulties in, just like mentally, like, so like with like Homicide and Hollow, I touch on it in the author's note, but this was a very difficult book for me to write. Like authors, like again, like it doesn't matter when, like authors will talk about like the second book syndrome, how the second book, like even if it's not like the second book they've ever written in their life, but like the second book, like in a series in particular, after you debut, it tends to be harder, right? There's different pressures and time constraints. You know,
Right.
Arsenic and Adobo, it took me 1.5 years to finish a draft, almost 2 years to make it, you know, good enough for like to start to find an agent and to go on submission and all that. Whereas Homicide and Halo Halo, because I was on, I had a contract, I was on deadline, I had to finish a draft within like 6 months, maybe, you know, and then you factor in like different kinds of pressures. Like I wrote Arsenic and Adobo for me and my mom. I really did. You know, I had a book that I had written previously that got me an agent but never sold. And that book was very, very personal. Whereas this is more like, you know what, I'm just going to, and while that book was on sub for about 1.5 years and not selling, I started working in the book Arsenic and Adobo. And I was like, let me write something light. Let me write something fun. Let me write something that I know, you know, my mom would want to read. And I could, you know, take my time with it. And, you know, I didn't, you know, I wasn't precious about it. I just wrote whatever it is I really, really wanted to see. Whereas with Homicide and Halo Halo, there's different expectations, right? Like now this book can't only please me, although that's still kind of one of the most important things. Like it has to sell, right? If nobody buys these books, that me, you know, like it could end after that first contract. I might not have any books anymore. The sad thing about publishing is like, there's not that many, you know, Filipino American genre writers, particularly in the cozy mystery space, none that I know of, at least, you know. And if my book failed, because, you know, I had to write the second book before the first one even came out. If that book failed, they could, you know, publishing could use it as an excuse to be like, oh, well, nobody wants to read this. So we're not going to take a chance on any more, you know, like cozy writers of color or Filipino, you know, like, you know, something like that, which has been used as an excuse in the past. So there was just like this unnecessary pressure that was put on me.
Right.
And so with debut year, it was a roller coaster. It really, like, you know, one thing that I learned is that even good things, like objectively, like there's no like negative things about it, can be really overwhelming. You know, like how many people are ready for their dream to come true, as cheesy as that sounds. You know, I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, and this moment was here. And then it was just like, oh, was I prepared for this? How was I going to feel? You know, you build up to it your whole life, and then it happens. And then the next day you're still the same person, right? Your life hasn't really changed necessarily. You're just like, oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, and then of course, you know, a lot of writers will like dream. You know, I was dreaming about my book launch party before I ever had a finished manuscript, ever. You know, and then of course, you know, those plans had to change because we weren't meeting in person when my book was coming up. I was able to have like a really small belated in-person launch later on, but you know, it was not the same. It was not what I had originally envisioned, and in many ways that was kind of a letdown.
Definitely an event that you know, and by event I mean the pandemic in general, not something that you could have prepared for or entertained the thought of in any of your dreams of launching a book.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, I know a lot of people are getting zoomed out, but the fact that there are like virtual options really has been like a great, so because like I don't think in the like, sadly, if this hadn't happened, I don't know that anyone would have tried to pivot or made these events as accessible or as common as they are now. You know, so one of the good things that we can do events like this. You know, like I'm based in Chicago. I have no idea where you're based, but you're probably not, you know, within the same city as me. So the fact that I can, you know, I talked to a book club, you know, in the Philippines. I never would have been able to do that without this kind of technology. You know, I recently did another book club. Somebody was zooming in from France. You know, it's yeah. So like the face-to-face time I get with readers now that I wouldn't have had in the past, that's fantastic. That I wouldn't trade for anything. So like it's, yeah, I'm going to have to silver lining this. I'm sorry, you know, like, so at least that aspect has been great. Having like a wider reach than I normally would have.
Yeah, I agree. And it's honestly something that as much as I'm looking forward to attending in-person events, you know, in the near future, I honestly hope that we continue with this virtual space as well, because you're right. It's made it so accessible to be able to have these conversations. And, you know, for instance, I'm based in Portland, Oregon, by the way, but
so the other side of the country, basically.
But to be able to, you know, attend a a panel with several authors in New York in the morning, and then also check into a live Q&A in Los Angeles in the afternoon. Like, you have options to be able to do that. So I do hope that continues in addition to the in-person events.
Yeah, like I think like the hybrid model like works really well. Like, if you are able to, physically able to, financially able to meet in person, great, that's awesome. That has a special energy. But if you're not, I feel like you shouldn't be locked out of these opportunities just because of that. So having a hybrid option, I think, has been really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I see some people popping questions into the chat. That's fantastic. Please continue to do so. But you know that I've got my laundry list of questions as well. So I will do my best to get to as many of them as I can. But I think we've waited enough. I think as we segue into discussing your books, and we will keep the chat relatively spoiler-free for anybody that hasn't had an opportunity to read them yet, I'd love it if you could just sort of set the stage for Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mysteries, where it takes place, and who our, main cast of characters are.
Yeah, sure. So Tita Rosie's Kitchen is the name of a small Filipino family-run restaurant in Shady Palms, Illinois. Shady Palms being a fictional town set a few hours outside of Chicago. And Tita means aunt in Tagalog, by the way. So even though my protagonist is Lila, the series is named after her aunt because her aunt is kind of like the heart of the family. So my protagonist, Lila Macapagal, is a 25-year-old Filipino-American woman. And in Arsenic and Adobo, I was playing with tropes. So a lot of cozy mystery tropes are kind of similar to rom-com tropes. I was I got the idea basically from my mentor Kelly Garrett, an amazing Black female mystery writer. And she had an amateur sleuth series before called the Hollywood Homicide, and we still try to keep up with current cozies. And we were chatting, and she was like, a lot of the books I've been reading lately kind of are like rom-coms. And we were kind of discussing it. I was like, oh my God, you're right. And so like the entire first page of Arsenic and Adobo is me like playing with the tropes that both share, right? So like Lila is a young woman from a small town who thinks she's kind of like too good for everyone. She really wants to get away, right? So she goes to the city for college, falls in love, and that relationship ends horribly. So she has to, return to her hometown, licking her wounds, her tail between her legs. And she has to kind of save her aunt's failing restaurant because the restaurant has been in trouble for some time. And so like while she's there, she reconnects with her high school sweetheart. But because this is a murder mystery and not a rom-com, it's not a second chance at love, right? It's actually like, oh, this guy is the jerk food critic for the town who's been trying to get the restaurant shut down. And so like one day, mid-meal, mid-review, he drops dead and she becomes the main suspect in his murder, right? So that's what opens up the series. And so a lot of this series is Lila trying to find her place in the world and like understand like what is home, what does success look like or mean to her now that, her goals have started to shift or change or have been taken away from her in some ways. What does family mean? What are like the burdens of family, but what are also like the gifts of having a family that cares so much? And of course, like food, right? Food as a love language is what all of this is about. So the way cozy mysteries work, if people are not familiar, it's not like romance, where like even if it's in the same world, it's a different protagonist. Cozy mystery follows the same protagonist, and it's set in the same world. So Homicide and Halo Halo, which is book 2, which just came out in February, it's following Lila. It's a few months after the events of book 1. She's going through some things due to the events of book 1 that I don't want to touch on because those are spoilers. But the town beauty pageant has come back, and she's had a connection to it from her past. That's just bringing up all these really uncomfortable memories that she has from her childhood. And, of course, the head judge is murdered, and her cousin Bernadette is accused of the murder. And so, like, they're frenemies, like rivals. But they got to kind of put their differences aside because, as annoying as Bernadette is, Lila knows that her cousin would never do anything like that. So she wants to kind of do her part to help clear her name.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think you said it kind of perfectly too at the beginning, about the differences between rom-coms and cozy mysteries, because, like I said, I'm an avid romance
Mm-hmm.
reader, and I'm also an avid mystery reader. And I think there's a lot of crossover between the fan base for each genre,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to cozy mysteries. And I hadn't really been able to think about why before, but what you said makes perfect sense. It's just that if this was a romance or a rom-com, she might fall in love with her ex, high school
Yeah.
sweetheart. And in the cozy mystery version, he's murdered. So
Yeah.
just to put it all into perspective.
Yeah. Well, this is anecdotal. I don't have any proof, but like someone once told me that a lot of more recent cozy mystery writers were formerly romance writers who left the genre when romance got a little too spicy for them. Because cozies don't have to, they don't always, but they very often have like a strong romance subplot. But like it's like
Right.
romance that's like zero heat. Like I don't know if even like there's most often not even kissing or anything like that, but there is romance woven in.
Yeah, they just choose to spice up the kitchen more
Yeah.
than the actual, like,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. No, I love that. Well, and I don't know about you, but I think one of my favorite things about cozy mysteries is that they generally come with a somewhat zany cast of characters, and
Mm-hmm.
the setting itself, I feel like, almost acts as a character of its own in most cozy mysteries. And I've got to know how much of
Mm-hmm.
these characters and the restaurant setting were inspired by real life people, places, and experiences of your own.
Yeah, that's such a and people are usually like I am actually I have no experience like in the restaurant business. When it comes to food, like my father was my influence. Like he was such a good cook. He is the one who taught me about food as a love language. He taught me about Filipino food, like specifically. Like for me, the taste of Filipino food is the taste of home, and Filipino food should taste the way he made it. Just because, like again, that's how I grew up. Um, but we always like the family always like we kind of pushed him. Like we're like, oh, you should open a restaurant. He was that good, but we have family in the Philippines who worked in the restaurant business. He's like, no, like it's long hours, it's really hard work for low. But he's like he preferred like a stable salary paying job and just cooking for the family, and like that was how he would show his love. So everything that's just like research and stuff like that, like the restaurant aspect. As for the characters, I was very careful because again, like I didn't want anyone pointing and being like, "Is this me?" Because like not everyone looks so good in these books. So what I did is I took a quality from people that I knew that I felt like would work really well, and then built a character around it. So again, I talk about my father. My father passed away back in 2018, so sadly he never, got to see any of these. But the character of Tita Rosie, and I mentioned food as love. I'm going to say it like a million times. I based that from him. But nobody, like not even my mom who reads the books, is going to look at that character and be like, oh, that's just like your dad, because she's nothing like him. I just took that quality that I knew I wanted to live on in a book and built a different character around it. And I do that with many of them. The calendar crew in particular, they're more like an amalgamation of all the aunties in my life and all the auntie stories I've gotten from friends and things like that. So the calendar crew are less like individuals and more like like a Greek chorus of every auntie who's ever lived, basically.
I love that. That is the perfect way to phrase that. Well, and you've mentioned it, several times. There is no shortage of delicious food in this mystery series. And I mean, it's there in the title, isn't it? In each of the titles.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a favorite recipe amongst the books? And, is there, obviously there's a tie-in with, your father and his cooking, but is there personal history behind the specific recipes you've chosen to include in the books?
Yeah, so sadly, my dad was like a super old school cook, like without like measurements or anything like that. Like he did by feel, by taste, and all that, which is not great for recipe writing. So he didn't leave any of his recipes behind. So what I do is like I'll research a bunch of, like, once I settle on what I think is going to be, you know, the recipes I want to include, I'll do a bunch of research and like cobble together a bunch of different versions. And then when I make it, I tweak them to the way I remember his food tasting. Right. Because, like, you know, I've tried recipes where I'm like, oh, this is good, but it's not the recipe I want to include because it's supposed to taste like, you know, like, so like, that's what I do. You know, I'm not copying and pasting like recipes from the internet. I use them as a base and I mess around with them until I get them the way I want them to be.
Yeah. Well, and for any amateur bakers or chefs like myself, I do just want to let everybody know that there are recipes included at the end of Mia's book. So be prepared because after reading these books, you're going to be hungry.
Yeah. Oh, and then you asked about favorites. So like, I would say like my most, probably my most popular recipe based on what like people have told me is probably the Ube Crinkles, the Ube cookies in the first book, Arsenic and Adobo.
Yes. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they sound delicious.
Yeah. They're very like Instagrammable because ube is like a purple yam that's really common in Filipino desserts. So like it makes this really beautiful like violet colored cookie, which is like really like distinctive. But the flavor itself is quite subtle. It's I mean, it tastes like a sweet potato basically, but it has like slight like vanilla-y overtones. It's kind of hard to describe these flavors that don't have an equivalent in the US necessarily, but the people who have tried it have been like very pleasantly surprised. You know, you look at purple and you're like, what is that going to taste like? And then they're like, oh, it tastes like delicious.
Yeah. I was about to say the word is delicious. You don't need to like equate it to any other flavor. Just tell them it's delicious. And it is. I used to live in Los Angeles and there was a cafe that specialized in ube and they did ube cupcakes, ube donuts, ube ice cream.
Was it
like, and
Cafe 86?
Yes.
Yeah. I've been to LA once and I visited it and I was like, oh my God, this place is like heaven.
Yeah. Oh, so good. But you're right. I think people just hear like, oh, because it's a yam, and so people hear, oh, it's like a vegetable, you know, dessert. What? And no, don't let that fool you. It is delicious. So
yeah, trying to convince people purple yam. It's like they're like, I know what it sounds like, but really, it's quite tasty.
It's so true. It's so true. I did just want to pop in one of the questions from the chat, which is, what's your favorite part of the writing process? Do you like dialogue, plot, you know, whatever it might be?
So my favorite parts, I'm going to talk like for like that I like for different reasons. So like I like the beginning when I have the initial spark of an idea and I start getting excited about what the book could be. You know, where I'm just like, so like right now I'm in the plotting phase for book 4. And so like, I know what it's about, right? Like the general, like I have like the back cover copy I've already, but like now that I'm like planning out the details and like filling out like the new characters I'm going to introduce and like the whys, like that is a lot of fun for me. I hate the drafting process. The blank page is very scary. I do enjoy dialogue. I think that might be one of my strengths. Or at least it's the most fun for me, I should say, if nothing else. I like writing dialogue, and I also like the revision process, right? Like once once the first draft is out of me, like blah, I like knowing that the skeleton is there, and now I can make it better.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if I've ever actually heard a writer say they enjoy the revision process, but the way you phrased it, I understand what you're saying because it's on the page. You've gotten something on the page at that point, and that's the hardest part, in my experience, at least.
Yeah, you know, like it's really common. People are right. Like the first draft is basically you telling yourself the story, and then for me, revision is making that story the way I envisioned it originally. Right. So like, not like, oh, okay, so that's what I thought was going to be, but you know, but this is what I need it to be or what I want it to be. And I can shape it in various ways.
Yeah. Like clay or dough. There you go. Bring out another baking reference.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one of the things I also want to highlight that I love about your books is that just, you know, they are cozy mysteries. However, you don't shy away from touching on, for lack of a better word, real themes like PTSD, dismissive attitudes towards mental health, queer representation. Obviously there's a lot of cultural elements involved. And so I'm wondering,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the challenges of doing that in a genre that's built so
Mm-hmm.
much on, again, a cookie cutter, I guess, more of like a cookie cutter type of trope genre?
So, yeah, I know that's definitely one of the things that I struggle because there are two things that seem like they should be opposed, right? I love cozy mystery because they're escapism, right? That's what you pick up a cozy mystery because you want something light, you want something fun, you want the feeling of like, yes, justice is served at the end, right?
Yes.
And so you're looking for that particular experience. But at the same time, cozy mysteries are still crime fiction, right? Like these occur in a society, they happen for a reason. You can't talk about justice without talking about like social issues. And particularly for someone like me, right, like my existence is politicized, right? I'm a woman. I'm a Filipino woman. I'm a queer Filipino woman. I'm a queer Filipino woman married to a black man. Like I'm from an immigrant family. There's so many layers. And complexities and intersectionalities that like just existing, like they're like one of the things that I notice when I read cozy mystery, like the way that protagonist moves through their world is not a way that I can, not realistically anyway, I remember reading, again, this is by an author I really genuinely like. This is a series I still read, but I just remember it still sticks in my head years later. There's a scene where, the protagonist gets really upset at like the cop character who's like a potential love interest, and she has kind of childish, and she like throws a handful of peanuts at him. And I was like, can you imagine if I threw something at like, no, never. That would not. So like when I was crafting my character of Lila, I'm like, yes, we're going to kind of keep things light, but I have to acknowledge that, she's not just Filipino, right? There's so many layers to her, but the fact that she is Filipino American shapes how she sees the world, and more importantly, shapes how the world sees her, particularly in a murder investigation. Yes. So like, I was careful to seed in things where like during like the initial interrogation, she's like, oh man, I might be coming off a little too aggressive, and so she kind of like has to like back away, and she's conscious of like her body language and the way she could be coming off in a way that probably like a white cozy protagonist wouldn't even think about, right? And then there's just all these different things where like,
right,
our lives as people of color, as queer people, like they're not trauma, like not all trauma all day every day. And I wanted to show that in these books where we can just be, where they have like all these joyous things. Yes. We get to be the heroes of our stories, but also they do exist and they do affect us. So, I want us to have the fun escapism, have the fun of solving the mystery, reading about this delicious food, seeing this, brown girl, getting her life together and becoming the hero of her own story, but still being like, oh, I know what it's like to experience that. I feel seen because, mental health issues can be a problem, and like it's something that's not spoken of in my family, or oh, I've been in that unfortunate circumstances, like just those little things where you can connect in a deeper way than you might have in like a more like, surface level kind of story.
Oh my gosh, no, I wish I could give you a hug right now, because honestly, these are all things that, I look for in all of the books that I read. And it's a conversation that, I can speak to romance more, but that is constantly being had of, why can't we have these stories about queer joy? Or, I'm a fat woman, so I love experiencing stories with characters who look like me and have bigger bodies and still get to experience a happy ending with somebody who worships them in their body. So I think these are stories that we need told. And for anybody who will argue the opposite and, talk about, oh, well, it's fiction, it's an escape, it's, it doesn't have to reflect reality. Well, but for me, it's hard to exist in some facets of reality and not in others when I'm diving into books, movies, TV show, any sort of media. It's hard to pick and choose the elements of reality that you want to be there, because then it presents as false. At least that's my takeaway as a reader. And, as somebody who also wants to write, is that I want to reflect the characters and the experiences that I know and love. And I want to see those reflected back to me. It's a life imitating art, imitating life sort of environment.
No, yeah, it's really like a funhouse mirror, like the mirrors going. Yeah, I see. Yeah, I definitely agree.
So I love that you're doing that. I think that's fantastic, and I think that that's something that deserves a whole, conversation much larger than the one we're having today. But this is a start. This is for sure a start, and obviously it's working because you have so many people who love these books. And like you said, you've gone from a 3-book contract to now 6 books in the series. So there's people who want to read it.
Yeah, and that's wild because, I mentioned briefly earlier, like I had a book before Arsenic and Adobo that was agented but never sold. So that book, it was a traditional, it was not a cozy, but it was traditional, like Amateur Sleuth, which featured like a queer Filipino-American woman solving a murder mystery at a comic book convention. And back when I sold this, I got close several times. There were several times editors wanted to take me on, but the sales, people don't know, most big publishers, their sales teams have the final says on which books get picked up, because publishing is a business and they want to know if they can sell it or not. And the most common feedback from those rejections was that, this voice is great, but she has no audience. We can't sell this book. One rejection straight up said that traditional mystery readers were typically older white women, and so my queer older white straight women, so like my queer Filipino millennial protagonist, they were like, who is this for? Who's going to read this book? And so like that was like the most common rejection that I would get, and it was just like, I think a lot of people would read books like this if you would, expand your limited idea of who your readers are or who your readers could be.
Yes. Yeah, and that's my thought too, is that, okay, let's say that, looking at the readership of cozy mysteries, that in general, it is a predominantly older white female audience. That's fine. Let's just assume that. But let's think about that if you are introducing, books like Arsenic and Adobo and Homicide and Hollow Hollow, like who your readers could be, that not only will you have some of your current readers open up their eyes to something that maybe they didn't even realize was a possibility to read within this genre, but to me, you're opening up the readership in general to people that maybe were less inclined to read cozy mysteries as a whole because of these ideas that we've had about them and who the books are meant for and read by. So I think it's just about reframing how they look at it. And so I'm so excited that, as much as I would have loved to have read about the murder at the comic book convention, which I would have loved, and I still think that should happen, I'm glad that something came out of this, that you did find a way into this sphere with this series, and that hopefully this will just be the start of more change to come within the cozy mystery genre.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the hope, right? Like, I mean, change is slow, but change is coming, and so that at the very least, there's that. So with my first book, we tried to sell that in 2018, and it wasn't happening. And then Arsenic and Adobo, we sold that in 2020, and like that was like so the first book was like a year and a half of rejection. Whereas Arsenic and Adobo sold in 2 weeks, which like doesn't happen. Like that's like wildly fast in the publishing world. And it was at auction, which means multiple publishing houses were interested in it. So I went from like being told like I had no audience, nobody wanted to read my writing to this. And so it's just like, and that was within 2 years. So yeah.
So who knows what's to come next, but I'm excited. So we'll be wrapping up our chat here in a few minutes, but if anybody has any other questions they want to pop into the chat, please feel free to do so, and we'll hopefully get to some of those. But looking ahead, what is up next for the series? I know that you mentioned Blackmail and Babinka comes out in October, and then there's more beyond that.
Yes. Book 4 is coming out, I believe, sometime summer 2023. I don't have an exact date yet because it's just so far in advance. And that book is for all the people who love the Calendar Crew. The Calendar Crew are Lila's group of godmothers. So again, in Filipino culture, it's common to have more than one godmother. So that's one thing I did take from my life. So I have 3 godmothers and 3 godfathers. So Lila has 3 godmothers who are just constantly sticking their nose into her life. So they're called the Calendar Crew because their names are April, May, and June, even though they're not related. They just happen to all have those names. And I describe them as like showering love and judgment on her. So those characters have always been like the most fun to write, but I kind of use them sparingly in all the books. Like they're meant to be like background characters. But with book 4, the one of them, their niece is killed, and so it becomes it hits very close to home for them, and it looks like maybe one of they are being targeted, and so now the tables are turned because usually they're the ones all up in everybody's business, but for Lila to help try to keep them safe and try to figure out what's going on and who the killer is, she has to kind of delve into their lives and see like who they upset that maybe kind of led to this tragedy.
Yes, I love it. I'm excited. And then there's more to come after that, which is great.
And there's more to come after that, yeah.
So excited. Just keeps going. Hopefully this 3-book to 6-book series will soon be, a 12-book series. I mean, who knows? But have you thought about, and maybe this is even insane to think about just because there's so much in the series already, but have you thought about if there's another cozy mystery one-off or series that you'd love to write beyond the Tita Rosie's Kitchen mysteries?
Yeah, there are several ideas I'm working on. So like one idea is for like another cozy mystery. 2 ideas are romance that I'm still kind of another. So I have like a YA mystery proposal I'm working on, 2 romance ideas. I'm trying to I'm like gathering ideas and trying to develop another cozy mystery that I really am thinking about. So like right now, but of course my focus is on my contracted work and I'm not the fastest writer, but I do have ideas that I want to develop further and hope to, sell and have have new series out alongside this one.
Oh, well, I'm excited. And you please bring those romance ideas over to me anytime you want to chat. I am here for that.
Yeah, with my cozy idea, it's very vaguely like the idea of like these 3 Filipino sisters who like run an apothecary, and so like what I'm stumbling on is like, do I want it to be like paranormal where it's like actual magic, or more like grounded in like everyday like modern witchery? Because like pre-colonial Philippines did have like a pretty strong like natural like healing and ritualistic. So I'm like do I want to lean into like the modern day like idea of what it means to be a witch, or like the actual like paranormal, like they're straight up working magic? That's where I'm trying to figure out where I want to go in that direction.
Well, I would read both, because I have to say, I feel like witches in general are having a moment. I mean, honestly, in my life, witches are always having a moment. But I feel like in the last year, there's been a huge uptick in witch representation. And you're right, there's been like kind of a wide array of like, what does that look like? Are we talking about casting spells and magical wands, or are we talking about crystals and incorporating elements of the earth into these rituals, like, which I love. I love both versions. So I think maybe there's a sweet spot between the 2. Like maybe they do one by day and one by night. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, but that's like the fun, right? But like that's the problem with being a writer. That's why I told you like one of my favorite parts is the idea generation stage, because like there are no limits. It could be anything. But once you start writing, you have to make choices, and that's the hard part, because once you make one choice, that other path is cut off, and you're like, ah.
Yeah, it's that idea of it can be anything, but also,
Exactly.
oh God, it could be anything.
Yes, yes, yes.
I love it. Well, this has been such a treat chatting with you. And please, Mia, tell everybody where the fine friends listening can, find you, follow you, keep up to date on all of your upcoming releases.
Sure. So I have a monthly newsletter where I share like novel news, events. I include a Filipino themed recipe every month, as well as occasional giveaways and things that I'm obsessing over. So you can sign up on my website, which is just my full name, miapmanansala.com. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, mostly Twitter and Instagram, not heavy on Facebook. And it's all the same social media handle at MPM the Writer. So my initials, MPM the Writer.
Love it. Fantastic. Yeah. And obviously there's some time between now and the next release. So if for some reason you haven't had a chance yet to read Arsenic and Adobo and Homicide and Hello Hello, now's the perfect time to catch up. We're heading into the summer season. Grab those books, take them to the beach or, whatever outdoor environment you have near you. Although I have to say I lived for 2 years in Chicago, and I'm a big fan of the beaches in Chicago.
And these books are very much beach reads. Again, like, yes, they touch on heavy elements. Yes, there is murder, but at the same time, there's like love and laughter and, all that lightness and delicious food. So definitely good summer reads. Yeah, so much food.
We can't forget the food. And I will find any excuse to talk about food, regardless of what the conversation is about. So needless to say, I'm a fan. I can't wait to read more. If anybody listening happens to also be a fan of romance, you are more than welcome to check out the Boobies and Newbies podcast. I'm also over on Instagram, Twitter, all the places at Boobies Podcast. Yes, I say the word boobies a lot. You can also find me over on TikTok these days. So I'm having fun with that.
Oh, you're braver than me.
Oh, I know. It's, what? It's just another platform, right? But I'm a performer at heart. I can't help it. So I will find any excuse to make a fool of myself. But no, this has been so much fun. And like I said, I'm so excited for the next book, Blackmail and Babinka, and beyond, because there's a lot more family fun and food to look forward to. So thank you again, Mia, for hanging out with me. And thanks to everybody who joined us today.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for some great questions. This has been a really fun, really casual, natural, conversation. I feel I really enjoyed this.
That's what we try to keep it casual. We try to keep it cool and casual when So thank you again, and everybody have a wonderful day.
All right, take care.
Bye.